A recent report revealed that almost £7 million worth of British military equipment was approved to be used by Israel in the run-up to the most recent action against the Gaza Strip. The British newspaper, The Independent, raised fresh concerns about the use of British-made military weapons and equipment in a 50-day incursion which led to untold suffering, death and destruction for the people of Gaza in the summer of 2014. Using the government's own data, the report claimed the sales included components for drones, combat aircraft and helicopters, along with spare parts for sniper rifles. Katy Clark, a Labour Member of Parliament in the UK, also said she believed it was evident that not only did the United Kingdom refuse to condemn Israeli military action, but it also actively allowed UK companies to arm the Israeli military throughout the latest war on Gaza. Arms export licences worth over £40 million have been granted to 130 British defence manufacturers since 2010 to sell military equipment to the Tel Aviv regime. How do the public feel about all this military support to Israel? How well does Israel itself respond to external criticism? And what message would the public wish to send about all of this to their government? These are the simple questions we sought to answer, and we began with a troubling one. Over the last 6 years, Israel has launched 3 wars against Gaza, and in those wars, over 2,000 Palestinians have been killed and 10,000 more injured. A third of them were children. In the light of all this, how do the British public regard Israel's human rights record? Here's what they said.
This is where I say I don't have a view. I have to say that I think it's very sad that in the 21st century, people can't get on with one another. That's all, really. We haven't progressed very far, have we, basically?
Well, it's not terribly good, but there are plenty of other nations in the world who are equally vociferous and active in their views. You have to sympathise with them to a degree, but after all these centuries, it's rather a pity it can't all be sorted out.
Well, it's not great, but it's not great from either side, is it? I mean, the only way I can see that the problems out there are ever going to get resolved, somehow, some way, the groups have got to get together and talk. But, you know, it's absolute tragedy. Anyone getting killed, but the absolute tragedy, the number of children that have been killed just recently, yeah.
Pretty poor, really, I think. You know, I think what I've read in the newspapers and watched on TV, they don't seem to have much respect for their citizens, do they?
I don't think it's particularly something that we'd all be proud of, but I think they are developing their own borders and rules, and it's something that will have to go through progression. And we can only help advise, but ultimately we need to let them be what they want to be, otherwise it will just continue.
Well, in relation to the human rights record, you probably have to assess it against others. Let's face it, is it the worst in the nation? Probably not, no. I imagine there are others. Are there other issues for human rights that we should consider, apart from what potentially could be which is obviously a war? Are they deliberately targeting children? I wouldn't suggest they were. I wouldn't necessarily know, but in some respects I wouldn't have thought they would be. That wouldn't necessarily go in relation to how they would get the support from the United States. So no, as a human rights record, it is a human rights calamity. Yes, it is. Should it be stopped? Yes, it should be. But ultimately, they're doing it deliberately. No, I would probably suggest they wouldn't be. So I think there are other areas that we should be looking at in terms of human rights.
Overall, I view their record as poor. I think public sympathy is slipping away from Israel.
So significant concerns about Israel's human rights record, especially in relation to so much death and injury. We turn to our experts for their point of view.
Ammunition and missiles, US-made missiles into a densely packed population such as Gaza, of course it's going to be absolutely devastating. I mean, they say that it's strategically struck buildings and places where Hamas is apparently hiding out, but the majority of the casualties are children, you know, so abysmal. They've got an abysmal human rights record. When I've been in Palestine, I've witnessed detainments, I've witnessed night raids, I've witnessed house arrests, I've witnessed 9-year-old children being arrested in the street just because they've been accused of throwing a stone. I've witnessed Israeli border police firing tear gas and stun grenades at children on their way to school, going through checkpoints in the morning. I've witnessed Israeli forces firing live bullets at unarmed demonstrators that are just armed with a rock just because they want their freedom, just because they want rights like everybody else.
Well, Israel's human rights record is absolutely abysmal. I think the figures speak for themselves, and we know that they continue to do this with total impunity. Now, in the past summer alone, they've deliberately targeted UN schools, UN shelters, and that's in violation of any international law, and these are blatant war crimes. So I think at this point there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Israel is a rogue state and that is very much involved in criminal state-sponsored criminality. So whether we can actually even consider it to be within the realms of international law is no longer an issue now. Israel acts as a war criminal state, and these acts, all the acts that have happened throughout the summer, actually speak for themselves.
The Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, condemned Israel and said nothing is more shameful than attacking sleeping children. We wondered if the public felt that Israel was responsive to criticism from outside. Here's what they said.
I mean, I'd like to understand more about what it is exactly Israel have done. I don't know the specifics. I mean, obviously, attacking a child in any way seems horrible to me. That's all I can really say. I believe we should encourage children and give them bright futures as best we can.
Not terribly well. And I think, from my perspective, Ban Ki-moon is a fairly sort of invisible character anyway. He's very rarely in the news.
I don't think they do, actually, and with some ignorance I would say that I think the United States is largely responsible for that. I think Israel receives so much support from the United States that they don't feel they have to respond.
I'm not absolutely sure, but I don't think they do worry about that. I think they're very, perhaps insular, they're very concerned about themselves, they're absolutely worried about their own security to a degree where nothing else seems to matter, unfortunately.
It kind of goes back to the situation. Israel have kind of walled Palestine off. I mean, and they're kind of attacking in a preemptive way because they fear for their own safety. That's always been their argument and their counter-argument to this situation.
They don't seem to give a monkeys about anybody, do they? Really? A bit like Russia, they don't seem to give a monkeys either, really. I think they're all in the same boat.
I think any Western view would be seen as particularly negative or not something they would listen to. They're all, so I think as we continue to condemn them, it may only fuel the fire for other people who want to jump on board and take advantage of those opinions.
They've been dealing with what they've been dealing with for a very long time now, and I think if you brought it to this country and said, we want to defend our own borders like we should be doing, then they're perfectly within their rights to do so. And what went on in history of Palestine, and I can't comment on it. I'm not on the ground there.
So, a mixed view of Israel's response to external criticism. We put the same question to our experts.
I think they completely deflect. I mean, we saw in the recent massacre, I didn't call it a war, I call it a massacre because that's exactly what it is. We witnessed Mark Regev, the Israeli Hezbollah mouthpiece on Channel 4 News, talking about and deflecting all of the critiques that Jon Snow was firing at him. They just lie, they cover it up, they deny, Hamas tunnels, Hamas fired from this place and that's why the child died. No, you fired the missile at the child, don't deflect it. This is what Israel's, most famous for, deflection. Doesn't work nowadays, unfortunately.
This is the thing with Israel, because we're so used to Israel acting once again with total impunity, that even when you have a high-ranking official stating the obvious, which is that there's nothing more shameful indeed than actually attacking sleeping children, then we're somehow surprised and almost grateful that somebody is actually stating that. Now, of course, Other people have mentioned these violations of human rights. Other people have mentioned Israel's continuous crimes. But of course, it makes no difference because Israel continues to enjoy the unconditional and unwavering support of the United States. So these words are actually quite vacuous when you realize that the UN has absolutely no power to do anything to Israel and act against it. Now, of course, given the nature of how the UN functions, which is very much like a dictatorship, whereby regardless of what the overwhelming majority of its members think, one country has a right to veto, and more often than not, the United States has vetoed any resolution that came in attacking Israel. Therefore, it really does highlight the fact that the UN is pointless and it's baseless, and regardless of what Ban Ki-moon says, which is obviously stating once again the obvious, really has no bearing on Israel, and Israel will continue to do what it's doing.
A recent report reveals that Britain gave £7 million worth of arms to Israel in the run-up to the most recent violence in Palestine. We wondered what the public's reaction was to that spending.
Well, pretty negative, but the reality is, if they don't get arms from Britain, they'll get them from somewhere else. So the supply of arms isn't really the issue. The issue is finding a solution to the problem.
That's horrible. If that's true, that's terrible. That shouldn't be allowed. No way.
I'm rather shocked, actually. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Britain was supporting Israel. And yes, I wouldn't support that at all.
No, I don't think we should be involved in the arms trade at all. It's certainly not to regimes like that. I know it's difficult, the arms trade, you know, we need to make money, we need to have people in employment, but I don't think we should be sending arms to people who are going to use them in this way, no.
I'm surprised. I mean, I didn't know that. I'm shocked that, I mean, I guess we've been supplying them. I mean, we have to supply one side or the other, sadly, and I'm guessing what, it's a very negative view, but I guess what we're getting out of it is a relationship with Israel that allows us to export fuel or something like that. I'm guessing it would be something along those lines. There's always a monetary reason behind these things.
I think the money can be best spent in this country, and I've just walked past about 25 people on the streets in cardboard boxes kind of thing, and I don't think we should be supplying any sort of aid abroad until we get clean up our own state of affairs. I know what's going on over there is pretty horrific, but in this day and age we really need to be looking after our own interests, and it may be selfish, but...
Well, in relation to arms, I mean, whose hands do they end up in finally? You never know whether arms are ever sold on. Are they going to the right hands? A nation is entitled to arm and defend itself against aggressors. We as a nation buy arms from other countries. I presume we even buy arms from China, I wouldn't be surprised. You know, we supply arms all over the world, and that their final usage we can't necessarily determine. I just think that's a fact of the arms race. Great if we had no weapons at all, but then how do you defend yourself?
It's a double-sided coin, really, because obviously the jobs that it creates, and you've got to sell them to somebody, and we can't cherry-pick who we sell them to, and then, you know, what do we do? Do we say yes or do we say no? So it's a double-sided coin, really. We're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. But I don't agree with selling them to proven countries that attack their own. Then I think we should draw a line and say, no, hang on a minute. That's not acceptable.
So, public surprise at the fact that Britain has been supplying arms to Israel. We invited the perspective of our experts.
I think it's absolutely abysmal. It's disgusting. Not in my name. I mean, obviously, this is taxpayers' money. It's the same with the US as well. They are also paying all this money, you know, for Israeli, for weapons for Israel. We need to break the bonds, the political bonds and the military bonds and the military financing of Israel, because Israel is a terrorist state at the end of the day, you know?
This is the sort of contradiction that we're seeing emanating from the British government. So on the one hand, they're constantly speaking of the importance of human rights, British values, exporting democracy. But of course, they're acting in violation of those very principles by actually selling arms to a nation that actually uses arms against women and children and essentially civilians. So this is an incredibly alarming development for Britain to actually sell arms regardless of the human rights record of Israel and continue to do that. So it's saddening to note that despite the British public opinion, which very much now realises who the guilty party is, i.e. Israel, the British Parliament, the British government, regardless, continues to trade with total normality with Israel.
Israel's military action with regard to Gaza has led to disproportionate levels of death due to the disproportionate level of armaments. We asked the public why they felt the United Kingdom had been so supportive of Israel in particular.
To be honest, I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to me. I wouldn't have a clue, sorry.
I don't know if I should say this, but I'm sure it must benefit them in some way, so why would they? If it didn't benefit them, why would they do it?
To maintain the relationship with the United States would be my view, because the United States have always been profoundly supportive of Israel, and I think it's time the US started to question that, and Great Britain.
No, I've no idea. I suppose there's a political agenda somewhere, but I don't know what it is. I don't claim to know.
Do you know? I don't know. I wish I did know the answer, but it always seems to be the case that we support in the superpower here rather than the minority. But what the answer is, I really don't know. I guess it all comes down to money if we look at it that way.
I wouldn't know. That's it. I don't know. I mean, it's the boys in power will tell you more than I would, but I guess it's to do with trade. And are we likely to get more Israelis on holiday over here spending money than we're going to get Palestinians? I don't know.
I want to assume there might be a political agenda. You know, we are huge allies of the United States huge supporters. Maybe less so under Barack Obama, I don't really know. But one would have to assume that it would actually help us significantly as a nation to keep the United States happy.
I think it's probably a balance of power and that they want to go with whoever will give them the best interest in the long term, as with most political kind of battles that go on. So there must be some end game that we're unaware of.
Is there an objective reason why the United Kingdom has been so consistently supportive of Israel? We asked our experts.
Because it's in a strategic spot in the Middle East. That's why. This is why the Balfour Declaration was created. Israel has a specific hold, and the UK, you know, is the ally of Israel, so they can use this arc into the Middle East.
I think British public opinion now is very much on the side of the Palestinians, and the British people now realise that the victims of the Palestinians, and they are victims of state-sponsored terror by the State of Israel. So in a way, the British Parliament, really, the British government and the British Parliament, to a certain extent, is actually continues to support a state in violation of its own public opinion. So it really shows that there is a level of disparity between what the governing people in this country are saying and doing and what the British public wants. So it really shows that very many politicians are out of touch with public opinion. Having said that, the recent vote by the British Parliament to recognise the importance, to recognise some sort of Palestinian state, although it will have absolutely no bearing on the ground, on the realities in Palestine, it does also indicate that British MPs are listening to a certain level, to a certain extent, to their constituents, and have therefore decided to side with the Palestinians. Now again, it really has very little bearing, and I think it has to be said that the two-state solution is dead. Having said that, it is an important step in indicating that the mood has changed, and that even in the heart of power, which is the House of Parliament in the UK, there is a realisation that actually history stands on the side of the Palestinians.
What message would the British public like to send the British government about their involvement in Israel? This is what the public said.
War and fighting has never proved it's sorted anything out. So I think peace talks are the best way forward in any country, and in any walk of life, really. I don't think that fighting each other is ever going to be the winner, is it?
It's Christmas, let's all love each other.
Any unnecessary funds and that sort of thing, just stop it. It's not helping anyone innocent, really. They're all going to bad sort of towards bad things.
Well, I believe in peace and love, so I don't see how sending weapons can help spread that at all. I mean, if it was going to help in some way, but I don't see how weapons can help. I hate weapons. I don't believe in them at all.
I'm not sure what I'd say, but certainly stop sending arms out to that part of the world, certainly for the moment, and do as much as you possibly can to encourage the sides to get together and talk, because without talking there'll never be agreement, and this will go on for years and years more. You know, it's been going on for years now, and it will just carry on for many more years. They must get together and talk and come to some sort of agreement.
Look after your own citizens first, and when you've got a nice surplus in cash, start being a bit more philanthropic, you know.
They should completely encourage a proper conversation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They should encourage all the world leaders to get together. They talk often enough, but nothing tends to happen particularly. Diplomacy, talking. I don't necessarily think things are going to change overnight. Let's face it, it's now been nearly 70, 80 odd years, etc. I don't think things will necessarily improve in the short term without the groups getting together. But fundamentally, they're completely opposed, and everyone never thought that the Irish issue would actually resolve itself, but it has managed to improve. And you know, obviously, they're in a position now where there is a sort of like reliant peace, albeit there are still areas where they're still having issues with certain terrorist organisations and breakaway groups. But you would have to suggest that the British government should encourage proper conversation and proper diplomacy. And in the meantime, doing its best to try and maintain some of that peace where they can.
To stop supporting a country that indiscriminately kills innocents. I think that's the simple message, and I think, you know, I think both sides should be encouraged to start an open dialogue instead of just indiscriminately kill each other. It's been going on for far too long, and there needs to come a point where both sides say enough is enough. And I think that time should come sooner rather than later.
What should be said to the British government about its involvement in Israel? We gave the last word to our experts.
Well, the Balfour Declaration came from Britain, so, I mean, it's our mess. You need to sort it out, British parliamentarians. Britain does a lot of things wrong with its foreign policy, but definitely correcting the mistakes from 1947 could improve the image somewhat, but foreign policy as a whole needs to be revised. But we definitely need to break the bonds with Israel. We can't be afforded to be allied with a state that kills children just because they're Palestinians or a different ethnicity.
The British Parliament, I think, has taken some positives. Some of the MPs, probably low-level and not front-bench MPs, have taken positive steps in recognising the state of Palestine. So I think that's something to be welcomed. Again, it's not going to have much bearing on the situation on the ground, but at least they've made a stand and they've actually expressed to their constituents where they side on this issue. Now, my message to them would be to sort of lobby slightly harder for the government and to actually act in a stronger manner against Israel, and to even force a trade and an arms embargo against Israel, because Israel is a rogue state. And I think if Britain continues to advocate human rights and democracy and try and play on its values of equality and all those things, I think it has to put itself on this right side of history and actually cease to trade with a rogue state such as Israel.
The UK says it cares about human rights, but it arms Israel, which in turn has killed and injured thousands of Palestinian civilians, many of whom are children. The contradictions are obvious. Whatever politicians say to justify those, the reality is that the public see it differently. It really is time for Britain to get serious about human rights. And when it does, the British government must surely ask some simple and very central questions about its stance when it comes to Israel.